Michael Clark for the road trip, reporting to you from Pierce, Nebraska. And you're probably wondering what Pierce, Nebraska has to do with, well, anything automotive other than taking care of your pickup truck. Well, we're in front of probably the biggest find when it comes to the Chevrolet brand, and that's Lambrecht Chevrolet in Pierce, Nebraska. Now, the dealership closed in 1996, but they did some really interesting things here in respect to how they got people to know about the cars that were available. If the 1965 Chevy was out, you probably didn't see too many 64s. Well, that's because a lot of the cars got squirreled away, along with some really interesting low-mileage trade-ins. But that's not all. There's also things here that typically got thrown away constantly by dealerships back in the day. We're talking about signage. We're talking about wheel covers that look like they were freshly minted. We're also talking about other things that you would find within any Chevrolet dealership of the time. There's over 500 cars that are going to be auctioned off here at the end of September. Some of them cars with only 1 or 2 miles and have been in, well, something resembling storage for some time. Now, a lot of the vehicles here have actually been stored outside, so they've been subjected to the hot and cold elements of Nebraska over the years. We're going to be going inside the dealership today. We're going to show you some of the most important finds when it comes to the Chevrolet brand, as well as all the little odds and sods that would make any man cave absolutely perfect. Now, as you can see here, the auction is happening September 28th to 29th, and there's going to be both the cars that will be auctioned off as well as additional items, such as the promotional materials. But what I wanted to do today on the road trip is give you an idea of the condition that is going to be expected on these vehicles. Now, you have to remember that even a 1964 Chevy Impala with 2 miles on it, it's going to need a lot of work to get put back on the road, because none of these vehicles were stored in the sense of, say, the Henry Ford Museum. They were simply parked, put away. So you have to remember, these are restoration projects, but we've already heard estimates that cars like these early 60s Impalas could be fetching as much as $100,000 a piece. We're going to see if they're actually worth it, and we're also going to show you some of the other great finds here in this beautiful Nebraska town. Now, if you've got thoughts, feelings, or questions about anything automotive, send an email to steelbeltedmind@gmail.com. You better buckle up, because this is going to be one heck of a road trip. The Lambrecht Chevrolet Company was run by Ray and Mildred Lambrecht from 1946 to 1996. Now, they only had one employee, a mechanic, but the rest of the family helped out when they could. The vehicles inside the shop are both no-mile and some-mile vehicles. Some of the most impressive are the 1963 Chevrolet Impala, 1964 Chevrolet Impala, as well as a 1958 Cameo hauler. There's even brand new Corvairs inside what remains of the building. There's all sorts of parts, everything from hubcaps to genuine Chevrolet accessories. The other thing you need to remember is that the weather got into some of the buildings over the years, so not only are you going to find a lot of dust on these vehicles, you're also going to find some droppings. But the good news is that most of the vehicles that are inside the dealership, the low-mile, very special vehicles, they are still very intact, even having some things of the period still in place. Now, you have to know that what you're dealing with here is a restoration, but what a great basis for a restoration, especially a 4-mile 64 Chevy Impala. It's definitely on the list. And check out vanderbrinkauctions.com for more info. Well, I'm joined by the lady of the Field of Gleams, and that is Yvette Vanderbrink. She is the auctioneer extreme when it comes to the Lambrecht collection. Thanks for joining us on the road trip.
You bet.
Now, let's get into this find. You've been doing this for a lot of years throughout the U.S. when it comes to finding these large collections and liquidating them. How does this one rate?
This is a really unusual one with so many new cars, and just the urban myth of a Chevy dealer in Nebraska that never sold his trades, never sold his holdback inventory. That's in accept is an unusual business model. And so that's how we arrived at so many vehicles. And he took a lot of the trade-ins out to the farm, which is over here where the dirt is. And the new ones he kept in buildings, then lost the buildings, then they eventually graduated out to here. And sadly to say, not everything is in good condition. We have everything from our dealership cars, which are good, all the way down to our project parts cars. Like right now, we're standing in front of a row of 62 to 65 pickups that are all brand new. And but they were outside, and a lot of them remarkably in good condition. Pretty solid cars, but they do have signs of being under the big blue machine shed.
Well, I got to tell you, when it comes to the Nebraska sun, I've seen some of the best patina here today. I mean, quite honestly, I wouldn't change one single thing about this particular line of beautiful trucks. But I think a lot of people need to realize that, yes, a lot of this stuff is project, but there's also a lot of stuff here that is worth its weight in gold and parts.
That's true. There's a lot of unusual vehicles here also, and a lot of street rod stuff. A lot of pickups that are exceptional projects that are hard to find. A lot of 55, 6, and 7s, and 8s and 9s. Lots of tri-5s and 50s. And it's just a really unique collaboration. If you're looking for parts, there's a lot of parts here for your cars. We are going to let people take their parts and leave the bodies. And so that's something unusual that we do. And, we just want to keep that automotive history alive, let those collectors get their parts, and, just keep everybody happy.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to the auction. Now, let's give folks all the details that they need to know, and one of the most important places to go is your website.
That's vanderbrinkauctions.com, and there is no charge for admission. There is no charge for a bid number. Dealers and public are welcome. Everybody's welcome. The 27th is our preview. The auction is the 28th and 29th at 9:30 in the morning right here. Out here, it'll look a lot different when they come back then. But again, you do need to be a qualified bidder. The criteria is on the website. If you can't come to the auction, you can bid online through proxybid.com. All the catalogs are up, all the information you need to know, and the videos, everything's on the website.
Fantastic. Well, Yvette Vanderbrink, want to thank you once again for letting the road trip walk this yard.
You bet. You're welcome.
Okay, now I'm going to show you some of the neat things about these particular vehicles that will make you understand how much different they are from vehicles that maybe have just been sitting in the woods for 20, 30 years. For example, notice that the hinges work. They're not binding on these particular old trucks. Now you take a look inside underneath the hood here, and you'll notice that a lot of the labels are still in place. They've been moving off of the vehicle. If you look over by the heater box there, you'll notice the Engineered by Chevrolet label is actually starting to come off of the truck. But you'll notice that behind it, there's no grease. The firewalls are completely clean. You still have the factory chalk markings that would have been on these vehicles when they came down the line. And as the vehicles got older, they simply disappeared. They were erased. Now the same thing happens over here when we come over to this blue Chevy truck. You still got the high torque 230. That's, of course, the 230 cubic inch inline 6 464. Same thing again. You've still got a very clean firewall. You've still got the chalk markings up on the firewall too. Even underneath, you're going to see how clean it is. But it's important to note that these trucks were outside for a very long time. So take a look inside and see that we still are dealing with some corrosion. But what's really neat when you start taking a look at these trucks is the tires. You are looking at the original factory tires that would have appeared on these particular trucks, and as well as the wheel covers. Now we have noticed that there's been some vehicles here that have had different bits and pieces taken off them over the years. Now here's another thing to point out. Remember the rubber sealing strips that would have been on a basic Chevy truck back in '64? Well, as you can see, you're going to have to replace that. But you're still dealing with a very, very solid body. We don't know for sure if we're going to be having any issues underneath, but remember, a lot of these trucks were parked on grass, so there's a good chance that you might come into some issues with body and cab mounts. But the other thing I want to point out is that we're dealing with wood boxes. So the wooden floor that you would normally have here, well, it looks as though they were actually removed at one point because the rails are still in place. So it would have been something that was most likely put on at the dealer, would have had the oil planks, everything made to keep that in place as it was made ready for the delivery of the truck. It's still got the factory spare tire sitting underneath here on this particular truck. So that gives you an idea of just how much of a time warp we're dealing with when it comes to what's sitting here at the Lambrecht lot, if you will. Now, it's important to remember that not everything we're dealing with here is from the 1960s and 1950s. Lambrecht was still selling Chevrolets right up until 1996. That's why we're seeing some very interesting stuff here. Like, for example, a 1973 Chevrolet four-door sedan, an Impala. Next to it, a 1970, I'm going to say that's a 75 sitting right here. We've got a Malibu next to that. And then we've got the Monte Carlo next to it here. Now, not all of these cars are 1 or 2 or 3 mile cars. A lot of these cars are actually trade-ins. If you take a look out into the field here, you're going to notice that there's quite a selection, and they don't carry the Chevrolet badge. We're dealing with cars, for example, like this Cordoba over here. It would have been a trade-in, and according to the stories that we've heard from the Lambrecht people, they don't necessarily like having trade-ins on the lot. So that means that cars like this, much like a lot of these low-mileage end-of-year cars, were squirreled away. So you're going to find a lot when it comes to these types of vehicles that you just weren't expecting. So, for example, a bullet-nose Studebaker, that would have probably been a trade-in, possibly on a 1955 Chevy. You got the Ford truck over here. It just goes on forever in respect to all the different types of vehicles. You know, even Chevrolet Vegas over here, little red job, looks like it. You know what? I think we actually have a Vega GT over here. The trucks that we've seen so far, as we've mentioned, some of them are trade-ins. Some of them have got a little bit of issues going on to them. And sadly, a lot of stuff here has been gone through. A lot of people have taken parts over the years. It's kind of sad, but at the same time, you have to remember, what does this look like to the untelling eye? This basically just looks like a big automotive mess, but there's gold in these weeds. Okay, they're not for everybody, but how's about a brand new Chevette scooter from the early 80s? Okay, well, we'll keep going. We'll find something for you. You know, the one thing that's really struck me about the cars out here is the amount of Corvairs. And as we walk through the weeds here, you are going to find some of the most amazing ones, especially from the early generation. That's the ones that I've seen the most of here at this particular field. Now, if we walk over here and we take a look at this beautiful 1960 Corvair, well, just to give you an idea, it's still wearing the old school wide white wells on it. Even the sedan next to it, same thing. We've got coupes. We've got Corvair coupes here. If you want first generation Corvair, this is definitely one of the places to find it, because there was a lot of things that happened with the Corvairs that led to corrosion early on, especially the battery placement in the back. So the things that you would normally expect to experience for Corvair rust, you may not be getting here. Now take a look at this, a Corvair 95 panel van. I mean, you can almost see the Department of Weights and Measures or Manitoba telephone system down the side of it. That gives you an idea of a vehicle that really didn't survive for the simple fact that they were used in a commercial fashion, and they pretty much lived out their life very quickly. A Chevrolet Vega station wagon, still with the plastic on the seats. Do you want it? What's it worth? And that's the big thing that a lot of people have been saying here when it comes to the Lambrecht Chevrolets. What is any of it worth? Is it the type of thing that people are really going to get that excited about just simply for the ability to get very hard to find parts? Now, in the dealership, we saw wheel covers that have never been put onto a vehicle, not with a dent. I mean, it's the type of thing that even if you didn't do anything with it, you could put it on a wall. That's how beautiful this stuff is. I got some weird oddballs over here I got to show you. We got Chevrolet Citations, Malibus, a lot of four-doors here. That's what you're going to see here when it comes to the Lambrecht cars. A Cavalier Cadet. Wow, that says a lot about the paint quality back in the early 1980s, I'll say that. Now, I'm just moving along over to this side here, and I'm seeing a lot of my old friends. I had a 63 Chevy. I had a 73 Chevy. In fact, I had this car. I had a 1973 Chevrolet Malibu two-door hardtop with the 350. It's all here, but it's also pretty beat. So it's really more of a parts car. So you got to come to Lambrecht Chev, and you got to understand that anything that you're looking at here, it's a restoration project. Even the cars that are expected to go as maybe as high as $100,000, those are cars that are still going to need a serious amount of work. Now, we understand that some of the highfalutin collectors out there may never do that. They may just simply keep it as a static display because it's only got 4 miles on it once. That's what makes it very cool. Now take a look at this, 59 Chevys. We've already been hearing there's going to be quite a selection of 59 Chevys available. Not every car is here. Some of the cars have actually been squirreled away and they're going to appear at the auction. So keep that in mind. I'm really just trying to still take it all in, because the other thing that's really interesting here is that a lot of the cars were equipped with very basic equipment. I'm seeing a lot of Biscaynes. I'm seeing a lot of Bel Airs. I'm seeing a lot of cars that really had nothing in them. For example, the 1964 Chevrolet Impala, the white two-door hardtop you've been seeing on YouTube and also on this broadcast, it's got some weird equipment. It does have a 327 small block in it, but it has a 3-speed column shift manual. Now, when it comes to selling a car back in 1964, that might have been equipment that kept it right till year end. So that's part of the reason why some of these cars were squirreled away. We have heard that there is going to be some cars that are actually very rare that are going to be appearing here. We've been hearing of some muscle cars, 396 equipped types of vehicles that are going to be here for the auction. So keep that in mind. I just want to point out some of these older trades here, and when you think of how people used to equip things, you take a look at the old school driving lights on this fat fendered Fleetmaster. It gives you an idea as to what was actually being put on cars back in the day. Yeah, I got to tell you, I'm a big fan of all trucks 73 to 87. These ones here, well, they definitely look as though they were fairly rough trades when they came in. As we look over here, we also have another Studebaker missing its bullet nose. But a little bit further up the way here, we've also got the Lowy Coupe design Studebaker, this beautiful green coupe over here. It's sad to see that a lot of these vehicles have been inflicted the pellet gun shots and such of many years past. But the thing that needs to be remembered here is that you're going to find bits and pieces of trim that have been gone for so long. And if there's one thing that people in the industry have taught me, is that a lot of the aftermarket parts that exist, well, they're simply not up to the quality of the original equipment materials. So that's why you need to come here. Well, you remember back in the days of wood grain station wagons? Well, here's what happens when a 1969 Chevrolet Kingswood Estate sits outside under Nebraska's sun for probably about 45 years. Now, of course, all of the wood grain has peeled away, but if you start taking a look inside, you're going to see that it's actually got quite a bit of usable parts. The other thing that we notice here is we've got a lot of broken glass on some of these vehicles, and unfortunately, the rear window on this particular Kingswood Estate is gone. Therefore, the elements have got in. Same with this Corvair over here. The side windows are down. But that doesn't mean that there isn't something here that could be salvageable. Now, the only issue that we may have here is that a lot of these cars, it's going to be very hard to pick them up and give it a really close look underneath. So keep that in mind. But the other thing I've noticed here is convertibles. Now, take a look at this particular Mercury Monterey. The top completely gone, completely eaten away. But anybody who knows anything about restorations knows that some of these pieces are some of the hardest things to find when it comes to restoring a convertible. Now, next to it is a 66 Chevy Bel Air. I had a Biscayne. I'm hoping to find one here while we're walking around at the Lambrecht yard. Wow, look at this. 1965 Ford sitting right here. Galaxy 500. Good place to get some parts. You got the early Chevys. This is interesting too. As you remember back in the early days of the Power Glide, it was a big deal to have an automatic transmission, and they shouted about it on these particular Chevys. Now, as I move along here, I'm starting to ask myself, is there anything really special? Is there anything that's just gonna pop? Here's one right here, 1963 Impala, two-door hardtop. Again, a car, well, looks like it's had a pretty hard life at one point, and the thing that we have to remember is there's going to be a wealth of parts available with something like this, even though it's been picked over, so we got to keep that in mind. I'm seeing stuff like Torinos. There's even Ford Galaxies LTDs. There's just I am really trying hard not to cry right now, especially considering my new wife is holding the camera. But you need to turn the camera off. Okay. In 3, 2. Now, the one thing that we've heard a little bit as we've discussed things with the people here at Vanderbrink Auctions who are looking after this is that the Lambrecht Chevrolet people, they didn't bring in a lot of high option cars. A lot of these cars had things added even later. In fact, some of the Chevys that have got very little miles on them, well, they have very basic options. We already mentioned the 64 Impala with the 3-speed column shift. Well, it has a manual radio, not a push button. So as minimal options it could go on these cars. I've seen very little vehicles here with factory air conditioning. Again, something that would have really added to the cost of the car. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, as I move along here, just want to point out some of my other favorites. I'm a big fan of a 59 Ford. That looks fantastic. Almost looks like an old police special that definitely could have plied these Nebraska highways back in the day, chasing down speeders. I'm looking at some of these heavy-duty trucks here. You know, the grain body trucks. These are the type that would certainly have had something very heavy on them, but they never had anything heavy added on them. So that's definitely very neat to see. Now, as we keep moving along here, as I mentioned, we're going to see, unfortunately, a lot of vehicles that have, well, suffered greatly when it comes to where they were stored. Remember, a lot of these vehicles were parked around some pretty heavy trees, as this 1969 Impala tells us. Unfortunately, the victim of something very large and heavy. Same with the 68 Impala next to it. It's got the tree through the windshield. It looks as though that somehow kind of grew there. There's actually cars here where trees have grown through them, so you got to keep that in mind. Now, as we move along here and we get into the old school 50 Chevys here, like this particular one, I think actually we're looking at a 49, and it looks as though it was a trade-in because it has the Cornhusker AAA Motor Club sticker on it, so this would have been a trade-in back in the day. Next to it, this old school Chevy 2 and a 64 Ford Galaxy next to that. And I gotta tell you, one of my sick pleasures is actually right over here. And I am a big fan of 1971 to 76 Chevys. So when I see something like this 74 Impala four-door sedan, I kind of like it. I really do, you know, because this is the type of car actually, this is the era of when I learned to drive. I can parallel park this beauty within an inch. That's how much I like that car. And that's what's going to matter to people who really care about these types of cars. You're going to be able to recapture a moment in history, and even though it is going to require considerable cost when it comes to restoration dollars, well, you got to remember that a lot of these cars are gone. You're simply not going to find them anymore. And even in the condition of a lot of these cars here that have sat under the Nebraska sun, this is still a big find. Well, we got to trot over here, folks, because I definitely am a big fan of the 59 Chevys. And the one thing I've noticed is we've got quite a collection over here. And also the two-door sedans. The two-door coaches are definitely a car that you kind of have to appreciate, because in a lot of cases these were more of the affordable family car when it comes to the availability of Chevys. And something like this here, I'm not surprised that we actually have so many of them, because as we mentioned before, it's sometimes the equipment that is going to make all the difference when it comes to whether or not that car is going to sell. But take a look at this beautiful pink 59 Chevy two-door with a white top. Definitely keep things a little bit cooler when it comes to the hot Nebraska sun inside. But the thing that I'm actually noticing as we get closer to the car is that we're not without rust issues. If you look below the side of the doors here, we got a little bit going on in the rockers. But I have noticed, if you take a look at the back of the car, that the well for the spare tire still looks largely intact. Now, the one thing I do know about this particular vintage 58 to 64, the body mounts and such, there could be some horrific stuff underneath, and we can't get to all of it, and you have to keep that in mind when you're looking at something like this. My advice is, whatever you do, don't you ever think of bidding online for something like this. You have to come here and you got to look at these cars. And speaking of cars, don't I sound like a 1960s car salesman at this point? I got to show you some of my favorites here. We've got sitting right here a 1965 Chevrolet Impala two-door hardtop. Now it's not an SS, but it does have the 396 turbojet. So we've got a factory big block two-door hardtop car here. We can already tell by looking inside that it's had considerable interior damage. But take a look at the body that you're starting with. You are starting with such an incredible core when it comes to a restoration. Now, should you restore it? Should you maybe think about taking it the way of Pro Touring or possibly Restomod? My money's on Restomod, and as far as I'm concerned, you want to keep as much of this patina as possible. Now, take a look at this. When I mentioned that we didn't have too many cars here with air conditioning, well, this one does. It's got the factory sticker, air conditioned on the back window. That is one of the things that will definitely get your attention. You know, this is kind of sad because we got a great four-door hardtop here, a 1965 Chev that's missing the door. The driver's door is missing off this car. That's something we have to be aware of when it comes to telling people that a lot of this stuff here is, well, it's kind of been picked over. It's definitely upsetting. But next to it, we have a 1966 Chevy Bel Air four-door sedan, definitely one of my favorites. Someone's popped off the trim. In fact, at the dealership, there's even been situations where the sheriff has got back a lot of the trim and it wasn't put back on the vehicles. So they may actually have your rear window trim for this particular Chevy Bel Air. 1959 Biscayne two-door coach, you know, definitely a favorite of a lot of the highway patrols. So that was definitely what they used. And of course, it would have had something like a 348 big block to chase down the speeders. It just gets weirder here. Like even this 1990-ish Chevrolet Lumina, when's the last time you've seen one with the factory hubcaps on it and with probably next to no miles on it? We even got a Ford Econoline 150 Boogie van here. So there's a lot of weird stuff to see when it comes to the collection. I got to tell you, if there's the ones that really speak to me, it's going to be the brand new trucks. The trucks that have basically absolutely no miles on them. You've got to check those out. I think those are the stars of the sale. Well, folks, that ends our coverage here from Pierce, Nebraska. As we mentioned, there's a lot of diamonds in the rough here that you need to know about. And if you want to know about it from somebody who was actually here and walked amongst the iron, send me an email at steelbeltedmind@gmail.com. For the road trip, I'm a very giddy, happy Michael Clark.